All right, ladies. Well, welcome to the Pressure Canning 101 class. And this is going to be super informal. We're going to answer your questions. We're going to do what we can. This is being recorded, so hopefully we can share it back later. And if you guys have questions, go ahead and unmute, ask, and we'll go from there. But this all stemmed from our conversation in the Homestead Hangout chat group of let's talk about pressure canning. And there was a lot of fear around pressure canning. And I don't know, I don't remember as far as those of you that are on the call right now today, if you were in the camp of I've pressure canned, but it's not my favorite. I've never pressure canned and I'm scared of that thing like crazy, or I do like to pressure can, but I want to learn more. So we're going to kind of cover all the bases and we're going to talk, I will share what I have for a pressure canner. And then later on, we can talk about a couple other ones as well. But the goal is just to make us feel more comfortable. So diving right in, the pressure canner that I have is a Presto. I will show you the box. And I believe that this is what most of in our chat group have had, a Presto. I have a 16-quart pressure canner. I know there was a couple others who maybe have the larger version of this pressure canner. I would say that this is the most affordable pressure canner that's on the market right now today. That is very user-friendly, reliable, and from there you can pretty much go all the way to, I would say probably the top of the top is an All-American metal seal pressure canner. Maybe even the double stacking one is pretty cool. But if you're wanting to just like get started, you don't have a pressure canner yet, and you're looking for an affordable option, I would go with a Presto. Now, if you guys want to type in the chat what you have for a pressure canner, if you have one, go ahead and share that in the chat, and I will share those here too. So as far as like choosing a pressure canner or what's going to be best for you, it really just depends on what is your capacity and what are you wanting to have. Okay, Megan, you've never pressure canned before, so we're gonna show you. I would say, like, if you're looking at canners, this is a really great option. This is what my mom had for years. My grandmother had. Jenny has a 23-quart Presto, but never used it. All right, we are going to get you using it and getting you comfortable with it. So this is a pressure canner that my grandmother had, my mom had. And to give you a little bit of background as far as like, okay, who is this woman and who does she think she is talking about pressure canning? Because like most people are deathly afraid of these things, or I shouldn't say most, but it's a pretty common camp to be afraid of them. So my grandmother was actually a farmer she was a widowed farmer for almost 40 years. Her husband passed away in 1964. My mom was 9 years old, and she farmed up until the day that she passed. So she had huge garden. I mean, she crop farmed, she had animals, she had everything from cows, pigs, chickens, you name it, she had it. And she gardened, she canned. I mean, when we cleaned out her basement, this is a little excessive, but she had jars that had rusted through the tops and everything in the jar had dried because she had just continued to can and can and can for years on end, and maybe wasn't the best at rotating her stock. So that's something to be mindful of, and just something that you'll start to gain knowledge of as you start canning your own food. And so then my mom carried on that knowledge, and she canned. My mom mainly pressure canned, as far as I remember, green beans and tomatoes. And those are the two things that she taught me first. And so I started pressure canning green beans, I believe it was 9 or 10 years ago. And that was, I learned to pressure can before I even learned to water bath can, because my mom didn't really enjoy water bath canning. So she pressure canned and taught me how to, and then I got my own pressure canner, started learning. And the number one thing I can tell you is with your pressure canner, you should get a little book, the instructions and recipes. If you, for some reason, don't have a book that comes with your canner, find one, and find one that is specific to your canner. It will absolutely be the most referenced book that you own. I literally reference this book more than I reference even any books that I have that are like medicinal or anything like that, because I want to make sure that when I'm canning safely. And I just think it's so important to have something that was designed to go with your canner, so that if you're looking up, recipes to pressure can, you can cross-reference and you can see, does this fit with what I have? So that is something to keep hold of. Don't let anybody steal this book from you. I know my toddler loves to help me in the kitchen right now. And there's two pieces that I like, hands off, don't touch them. One of them is the book, and the other one is the weight for the pressure canner, because this is so easy to lose. And your weight may look different than mine. We'll talk about that here. So anyways, we will dive into the nitty gritty of how are you going to go from, okay, I have this canner, to actually putting food in the jars and putting them in your canner. So I am actually going to go through a lot of what is in this book, because I can't come up with a better way to make you guys feel comfortable than to actually use the real nitty gritty of how I follow pressure canning every single time. I don't skip steps. I follow the book. You'll learn a lot of canners out there will kind of go rogue on things, and that is absolutely your option to do. There's lots of different things that you can go, should I water bath, shouldn't I? And really it comes down to the acidity of the food. And again, going back to your references, I think it's just really important that if it says to pressure can it, you should be pressure canning it. Let the experts do the expert work, is my opinion. So just in the very first page, important safeguards to know. Of course, read all your instructions. I think I've said that like 3 times now. I think that's just going to make you feel the most confident in what you're doing. And then always, step number 2, and this was one of the first things that my mom taught me, was always check the vent pipe. So I have my pressure canner here, and this is your vent pipe. So there's 2 options to doing this. You can hold it up to the light and just see if you can see through it. Or what I find to be way easier, just blow through it. Make sure that you can blow air through it. Now, if you're going to choose to check it that way, do it before you heat your pot. I have never done this before, but I just can totally see it happening in somebody, especially like myself with small children. I'm constantly being interrupted. Just make sure that's the first thing that you do, that you're checking your vent. If that is venting, you should have no issues with your canner at all. As far as like the scary idea of, is it going to explode or whatnot? And now a canner in today's world, there are multiple safeguards to avoid that. And actually, I want to go back to one other thing as far as choosing your canner, because this is actually something you really want to think about as you're looking. So like I said, I have mine here on my stove top, but you can see I have a microwave above it. So I would not want to put this is not a double decker pressure canner. I can only do a single layer of jars in here. And I could not have like a double decker, like some of the All-Americans and even some of the Prestos can get really tall. For me, in order to take the lid off, I need to have that clearance. Now, if you don't have a microwave or a counter or a cupboard or anything above your stove, not as big of an issue. You'll also notice, I I think you guys can see, but maybe you can't. I have a Coil electric stovetop. I specifically picked that when I designed my kitchen because I knew that it would be better for canning. Now, this canner that I have is specifically labeled that it will work on a glass stovetop. However, you want to be really careful with that. One, making sure that the canner that you get is for a glass stovetop. And two, you just got to be careful with any movement of your canner and whatnot. I've always canned on an electric coil, and that's what I prefer. Of course, a gas stove would work just as well. You want to avoid using an open flame burner outside isn't really recommended. So just something to be thinking of as you're choosing your canner. So going back to the important safeguards, we've checked our vent pipe. Always check the air vent cover lock to be sure it moves freely before using. So again, that is right here. Just not all canners will have this. I know my mom's canner, her version, the older version, did not have this. Jenny says, I recently read that all Prestos are made for glass stovetops now. And that very well could be that all of the newer ones are. I don't know on older versions. So, but that's great to know. Okay, so we checked our air vent. Do not fill the pressure canner over 2/3 full when using it for pressure cooking. So if you didn't know this, you can use your pressure canner for pressure cooking. Just like, people have Instant Pots today, you can pressure cook in here. We're going to specifically talk about canning today, but it is an option that can be done. And then the next safeguard for pressure canning, of course, this appliance cooks under pressure. Improper use may result in scalding and injury. Exactly why people want to make sure that they're doing it properly. Do not place a pressure canner or attempt to pressure canner cook in the heated oven. And then do not pressure can on outdoor LP gas burners or gas ranges over 1200 BTUs. So again, you want to make sure it's just best to be using a stovetop. And then use extreme caution if you are needing to move your pressure canner containing hot liquids. Personally, I just don't recommend it. And then do not open your pressure canner until the internal pressure has been completely reduced. So this is something that I did not always do properly in my first days of canning. Once your processing time is done, your canning is all done, your weight is sitting there, everything, it just quit rattling. You want to let that pressure canner come back down to standard pressure on its own. If you have an Instant Pot, this is kind of the idea of like manual pressure release versus natural pressure release. You really want to be letting it naturally release pressure as much as possible, because otherwise that fast reduction of pressure can really inhibit your seals from sealing and can cause a lot of issues there. So we just want to make sure that we're letting it cool down on its own, and you're not forcing that pressure release. All right. Those are most of the safeguards that you really want to go through. So now we're just going to go through getting acquainted with your pressure canner, kind of knowing the pieces and the parts. They're pretty darn basic, but it is helpful to kind of see the pieces. And then you can kind of envision what you might be looking at in the future. So the first piece, like I said, is I showed you guys this was the regulator. This is the pressure regulator. Yours may look like a gauge. There's different variations. So depending on what you get for a canner, I really like this one because it's so simple. You really can't screw this one up. So there are little rings that go on it. This by itself is 5 pounds. And then when you put the next ring on, it goes to 10 pounds. And then there's a third ring that makes it go to 15 pounds of pressure. Now you're probably going, well, how do I know what I need? In your book, depending on what you're pressure canning, every recipe will say. So if I go to canning tomato juice, and at the end it'll say pressure canning process at 10 pounds of pressure, pints and quarts for 15 minutes. So it's always going to tell you how many pounds of pressure and how long to process if you're using pints or quarts. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. Just depends on the food that you're canning. So that's the pressure regulator. Next is the vent pipe, which we talked about, is that right in the middle. And then the air vent flat cover there again. And then there is on the inside a sealing ring. Now this is another thing to be just keeping a close eye on. You want to make sure that this isn't getting dried out or cracked. Now this is the difference between like an All-American metal on metal canner doesn't have a seal. So it is recommended to replace your seal. Actually, I think I read in the Presto book every 3 years. But that is, I've never met anybody who has replaced their seal every 3 years. There's probably people out there. I think my mom's had hers for 20 years and I have had mine for 10 now and I've never replaced it and mine looks good as new. The biggest thing is to make sure that you're caring for it well, that you're washing it up when you're done, that you're not leaving any residue on it, just so that it lasts well for you. The overpressure plug. So this again is another safeguard that will take care of if there's too much pressure in the canner. So those are those safeguards. And then in the bottom of your pressure canner is going to be your pressure canning rack. You need to make sure that you have a rack in the bottom of your pressure canner. Even in a water bath canner, you need to have a rack in the bottom. You should not be placing jars right on the pot. They will break. So you want to have that. And then, of course, there's the stock pot. Those are the main pieces. And let's see here. Questions on any of that so far? Functionality, what's there, what you're looking at. Okay. So now we are going to, move into getting ready to pressure can. So in your book and also on the side of your box, typically it will tell you how many jars you can fit in your pressure canner. So my 16 quart pressure cooker can hold with regular jars, not like regular mouth, not wide mouth. I can do 12 half pints, 10 pints, or 7 quarts. With wide mouth, I can do 8 half pints, 8 pints, or 7 quarts. So I constantly am referencing back to that so I know when I'm, batching things to pressure can, how many jars can I get in the canner at once. So that's just something to note. So getting ready to pressure can, of course, making sure that your canner is thoroughly clean, that there's no grime or whatnot in there. And then you are going to start preparing your equipment per se. So one of the next steps that you're going to go through is to check your jars. So you're checking these jars for any nicks, cracks. I just take them over to my sink and I hold them up to the light. My window is right there. And I just look for any imperfections in the glass that look like they would be a crack. Now you're always going to be able to see, I don't know if you can tell through my camera here, but like you can see that there is a glass like line there, but that's not a crack. So, you kind of got to use your discernment. Like, is that a chip? Is it a crack? Or is this jar good to go? From there, I just go ahead and rinse mine. And then I stick mine in the oven to heat them up before I am putting food into them, that one helps if there's a crack. Typically I put my oven at 200 degrees. And if there's a crack, it'll likely get bigger if it's in the oven there. It may not, but it is a safeguard to seeing that. And you want your jars to be hot when you're putting your food into them. Because if you're putting hot food into a cold jar and then you're putting in a hot pressure canner, all that temperature change is really hard on the jars. So heating them up, it also helps to sterilize your jars. So making sure they're nice and clean, and then putting them in the oven just helps make sure that they stay clean, and bakes off anything there. So some people will even say like 250. You can use your discernment on that, but I put mine at 200 and it works great. So you've checked your jars for nicks, cracks, and sharp edges. And then also just checking your rings to make sure that they're going to create a good seal, that they're not like overly rusty or bent or whatnot, to make sure that they're going to be in good using condition. And then for your jar lids, can you wash the jars in the dishwasher first? Yes, that's absolutely an option too. And then usually when you take them out of there, they're typically hot to begin with, or if you're drying them and then just letting them be warm. I've also used like boiling water, but I can honestly say I used to never heat my jars. I don't recommend it. I would heat your jars in some way, shape, or form, and then just really make sure that they're clean. So then, of course, you also have your canning lids. And now this is a standard one-time use ball canning lid. Now, these are one-time use. You should not be reusing them. If you decide you're going to reuse them, that's up to you. I keep them for emergencies, like after they've been used, or if I have something that doesn't need a seal, then I reuse them. So I do wash and reuse these, but not for sealing my food. Otherwise, there is the option of reusable canning lids. Now, these aren't something that lots of people use. I do have them. And sometimes if I feel like using them, I will do like one canner batch with these and then one canner batch with these. You risk losing a seal far more with these, but they are nice to have, and of course they're reusable, so you're not wasting money with your lids. And sometimes when lids get can you vacuum seal with a used lid? I'm not 100% sure. I mean, vacuum sealing, I wouldn't be as concerned of using it for, because if you lose the vacuum, basically your food's not really like going bad per se as quickly. You would maybe notice it more. It would just get, it would gain moisture. So it would be a trial, and maybe we could look that up and we can talk about it more in our chat group, but I don't know the exact answer to that. But if you're using reusable lids, just make sure you're following the directions with reusable lids. There is extra steps of boiling the rings, and they're just a little bit more cumbersome to work with. So just a note there. Okay, so we've got our jars, our bands, and our lids. Now, of course, food selection, you want to make sure that you're not canning rotten food. You want to make sure that you're using good, solid food. And then when you are filling your jars. Hello, Katie.
Yeah. Sorry, she must have pushed some buttons here. I apologize.
That's okay. We love to hear the voices. Mine would have voices here too if they were here.
I was finishing up school and then I realized what time it was, so I apologize for jumping in a little late.
That's okay. We're glad you're here. We'll get into question pieces here shortly. So of course, when you're filling your jars, again, you're going to want to make sure that you are reading a actual pressure canning recipe or instructions. And like if you're doing something like sauce, applesauce, pasta sauce, that type of thing, you want to make sure that you are working the air bubbles out. And let's see here. Typically, you're leaving a 1/2 inch to 1 inch headspace in your jar. Again, all of those pieces are going to be found in your recipe, and you're going to make sure that you have all those pieces covered. So just to give you an example, if we were canning green beans, in your book, like in my book here, it says wash young, tender beans thoroughly, remove stems and blossom ends or any strings, leave whole or cut into 1 inch pieces if you're raw packing them. So raw packing means you haven't pre-cooked the beans. Raw pack beans tightly in clean hot mason jar, leaving 1 inch of headspace. And then if you were hot packing, so you're covering the beans with boiling water and boiling for 5 minutes, and then you're packing your hot beans loosely in a clean hot mason jar, leaving 1 inch of headspace. So then once you have covered your beans with boiling water, leaving your 1 inch of headspace, you're going to adjust your jar lids, and you're going to process at 10 pounds of pressure, pints for 20 minutes, and quarts for 25. So again, if you are using actual pressure canning recipes, they are very detailed, very clear, concise. You're going to know exactly what you need to do with that food to make sure that you get a good quality seal and it's pressure canned as long as it needs to and whatnot. So let's see here. All right, next comes to filling your pressure canner with water. In your book, depending on the size of your canner, it is going to tell you how many quarts of water you need to fill your canner with. I finally highlighted mine because literally every time I can, I have to look this detail up. It's just one of those things that doesn't stick in my head, but you want to make sure that you have the proper amount of water in your pressure canner. So you're going to put your water in, and then you're going to heat that water up. And if you do have bad water, you can prevent stains on your jars by adding 2 tablespoons of white vinegar in with your water. Just a note, I don't do that, but it's an option. Let's see here. All right, so then you're going to, of course, go through the safety steps again, that you have checked that your vent pipe is clear. Now I start heating my canner up. I just put my lid on. And I do not actually seal my lid, but I will just start heating the water in my canner on like a medium heat while I'm getting my jars packed and whatnot. And then I let that start heating up so that when I start putting my jars in, the water is hot. Now that's your choice if you want to or not. Let's see here. Okay. So yes, it's your choice if you want to start heating your water or not. But if your jars are hot, it shouldn't be a problem. And then we're going to, once we have our food is ready in our jars, of course, then you're going to start filling your canner. Now I like to, this is more of a water bath tool, but I like to use it for pressure canning too. It just holds your jars. It allows you to put those jars in and take them out without having to reach down in your canner. Now you could use like a pot holder if you don't have one of these, and I can send you guys links for these tools if you don't have them. But I absolutely love having this tool, especially water bath canning. You're going to want one. It's just such a safeguard to keeping keeping you safe, and not burning your hands or whatnot, getting hot pads wet or steamed or whatnot. So really good piece to have. Another piece that I really like to have for filling my jars is a jar funnel. Again, super inexpensive, very practical, but not something that you have to have. Just helps with filling jars. So then once you have your jars are in your canner, you've set them on your canner rack, and you are going to go ahead and seal your lid on. So your lid goes on, but then like for a Presto, you have to turn it and create that seal. There is a lock on the inside. So this canner is now sealed. And then you're going to start heating your canner. Now, once you start heating your canner, you still have not put your weight on here. And I'm going to actually move you guys just a little bit closer so that you can see a little bit better. Okay. So now when I take this off so I can tip it up for you guys to see, when you start heating this, I like to start heating mine on like, okay, so my stovetop goes like low 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to high. I usually heat my canner in the like 7 to 8 range, so that it heats up. You know, it doesn't take forever, but you don't want to just like blast it on high and all your jars are heating up really fast. It really does help create a better seal and a better outcome if you heat your canner up a little bit slower. And then you're gonna know when it's time to put your weight on when this pops. Can you see that? When that piece pops, on this canner specifically. Now on your canner, you may have something different. Again, that's where you need to make sure that you're reading your instruction manual on your specific canner so that you know when to put that weight on. But essentially you want the canner to start gaining pressure, but being able to release that steam in those initial minutes. Then once that is popped, depending on what the recipe calls for, you're going to go ahead and put your weight on the valve or on the pressure spout there. You still have not started counting your processing time. Okay? Your processing time is going to start when this starts to rattle. You'll start to hear it rattle. And if you, depending on how high you have your stovetop turned, it might start to get like really, really loud. You want to slow that down to where it's just at a gentle rattle. Okay, as long as it's still rattling, it is still maintaining pressure. So that is when your processing time starts. So when when you're processing, let's say meat, oftentimes processing times are like 90 minutes. So by the time you heat your canner up, it can take, 20 minutes or so to do that. I usually gauge like it's going to take me 2 hours to process meat because the processing time is so long. Now with your vegetables, your processing times are going to be much shorter than that. 10, 15, 20 minutes. But that's just something to note. So then that's your processing time starts. Once your processing time is complete, so let's say your processing time was 20 minutes, you have processed for 20 minutes, you're going to go ahead and turn the heat off your burner, and you're just going to let everything depressurize. You're just going to let it sit there. You're not going to try to take the weight off. You're not going to try to move your canner. You're just going to turn the heat off and let it cool down and depressurize on its own. That is going to be the safest bet that you can do. And then after you let it start to cool down, you can always test and see, like, the first few times you might not know, well, how long is it going to take it to depressurize? If you just start to gently lift your weight, you'll be able to tell if it's still releasing pressure or not. Again, I just recommend to let it naturally depressurize. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and open your canner. Still be careful for steam if if it hasn't sat very long. And then you can remove your jars. The only other step that you're going to need to note, and honestly, I can't remember if this is in your pressure canning books or not. Once you have, okay, so you've taken your jar out, you've got your ring on there, your lid, and you move this to your counter. I put mine on a hot pad. I let them sit. I let them sit overnight. And then I check them. Has my seal hot? You'll be able to tell if it's indented, or if you push on it, you'll be able to notice if it hasn't sealed. Now, another way, and this is how you check, like if you're using a reusable lid, take your ring off and then go to grab your jar just by the lid. If your jar stays on the counter and you only get the lid, clearly that jar did not seal. Okay, that jar is not safe to put on the shelf. And then that is one that you can just put a ring on, put it in the fridge, use it up. Okay. Otherwise, if your jar is sealed, you are going to put your jars on your shelf like this. Do not shelf your jars with the rings on. If you shelf your jars with the ring on, you are creating a false seal, and you will not always know if this seal has gone bad. If you leave the ring off, if this seal goes bad, you're going to know right away. You won't have any false sealing there, and you won't risk the seal going bad, getting bacteria, and like resealing or something silly like that. So just remember to remove your rings. I remove my rings the next day, and then I just go put them on my shelf. And that is pressure canning in a about 35-minute snapshot. It is open for you guys to ask questions now. What pieces do you have more questions on? My husband thought you were supposed to leave the rings on because whenever he, let's see, I missed the second half of that. Let me see here. Whenever he'd gotten canned treats from friends, they always had the rings on. Yes, it is very common that people leave their rings on. My mom still does it to this day, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I like when I give like jam and jelly to people, I put a ring on there because in case they don't have an extra supply of rings sitting around. And so I was trying to tell him, like, no, they do that because you're a single guy. Like, you probably are not going to have canning rings lying around. And so whenever I hear someone else, it's like, take the rings off, or I see other food pantry stash that has the rings off, I have to always tell them, look, see, this is how it's supposed to be done.
Yes, it was a huge shift for me because I didn't know that until I started canning on my own. And then I started seeing people with their pantries, and there was no rings, and I was like, what's going on? But now I understand why it is very important. So
what brand of canner do you have? I think you said it and then I missed it.
I have a Presto 16 quart canner. Now, Katie, I don't remember, have you pressure canned before, or you've only water bathed?
I've only water bathed because it terrifies me to pressure can because I've seen where it, explodes. But my husband assures me that 10 pounds of pressure is going to be like up if it does anything. So I've only water bathed.
All of the safeguards today. So you'll have to go back and catch some of those in earlier. And I promise you, it'll be okay. Other questions or comments or things that you wanted to talk about? Jenny, are you feeling confident to pull that pressure canner out and use it this year? Yes, awesome. Awesome. And of course, you guys, you always have access to me, whether you have me via Instagram, Facebook, text message, just shoot me a message and I'm more than happy. Like if we have to, let's jump on Zoom and like walk you through getting going so that you can start pressure canning. How about you, Megan? How are you feeling?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. I just want to do pickles. Do you ever pressure can pickles?
Pickles would be a water bath.
Oh, okay. See, I don't.
That's okay. So pickles, and I know one of the questions you had asked about was crunchy pickles. Use Pickle Crisp.
Okay.
It's something you can find in the canning aisle, and it will give you crunchier pickles. So I actually do not do a lot of like dill pickles because we just don't eat them very often. We do lots of refrigerator pickles, like the sweet ones with the onion and just sugar, vinegar, whatnot. So I just refrigerate pickles. But if you want crunchy pickles, water bath them and use Pickle Crisp.
What about salsa? Do you water bath them or pressure can that?
Salsa is also one that I water bath. Yep. Because
Okay.
salsa is very acidic. And again, there you want to make sure that like the recipe that you're using, which the recipe that I shared is a good one for canning. But you just want to be careful, you know, if you're just finding some random salsa recipe. I mean, most salsa recipes are pretty acidic, but there could be the one out there that I don't know what they put in it, but isn't. So you just want to be careful there. But again, yep.
Okay.
We water bath can salsa. Yeah. I think Jenny, you maybe popped something in the chat here. Let me see. Oh yes, local extension offices offering canning classes. Absolutely. Katie says, I have a pickle recipe that I can share, both dill and bread and butter. Yes, Katie, share those in the group. We are always wanting to expand what we have for recipes. So other questions or things that you guys are wanting to can? Yes. So you can use your pressure canner to water bath can with. And there are instructions as to how to do that in your book as well. Or there should be in the book that you get, as long as yours says it can. Now I'm trying to remember if on the outside of this box it says, but I do know that this one can be used for water bath. I have a separate water bath canner that I like functionality wise because it has a rack that can be lifted out.
Okay.
Because you're immersing in water. And actually I learned something interesting on water bathing. We'll have to discuss this more in the group, but as far as your water level on water bathing, but we won't muddy the water here with that information. And I want to make sure that I'm like very clear on what I share there. But so yes. Any other questions? All right, if not, we will stop here and we'll continue this conversation in our chat group. And if you're watching the recording and you're not in the Homestead Hangout chat group, send me a message. We'll get you in there. We have lots of good conversation. And you guys are so welcome. I am so glad you guys showed up. We're here. So fun. Welcome to my kitchen. And we'll hopefully get to do more things like this in the future. So thank you guys. We'll see you all later.
Thanks, Lene.
Yes, you're welcome. Bye.